Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan, and I have some information about your second and final literature circle for this semester. I wanted to give you a chance to know what the books were going to be and what your choices were so that you can go over to the Google Doc that's posted in Module 5 and you'll know what you're signing up for. Okay, we have a lot of choices in this literature circle, and we're only going to have one group for each book. So be thinking not only about your first choice, but also about your maybe second and third choice, and that way, whatever's available, you'll sort of know and be able to get to something that you like. Okay, so some of these you might know. It's fine if you've read a book before, but you're also welcome to try something new. So really up to you. Just find something that sort of sounds interesting that you think you can get your hands on pretty quickly. Okay, so our first choice is called Esperanza Rising by Pamela Munoz Ryan. This is a wonderful book that you might know already. It's about a girl named Esperanza who lives in Mexico, and she has a really, really fancy life, right? She's got servants and she's got this huge house, and her dad's this wealthy farmer, and they've got like lots and lots of land and all this stuff. And then something happens and her life changes, and she ends up moving to the United States, and she actually becomes a migrant worker. Right, so this is a story about immigration, and it's a story about xenophobia, right? Sort of fear of outsiders and fear of foreigners, because she's not treated very well when she comes to the States, right? So if you're interested in those kinds of topics, clearly very much still in the news these days, this is a book for you. It's a lot about the land, a lot of symbolism, really beautiful book. Your second choice is called, I don't know if you can see these titles backwards. I hope they're not backwards for you. We'll see. I had some trouble with my webcam, so we're on plan like B, C, D, but we're going to go with it. This is called Faith, Hope, and Ivy June. It's by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor. She also wrote Shiloh, I think. You might have read Shiloh. This is a great story about two girls who live in a rural area of Kentucky, but it's a lot like rural North Carolina, right? I see a lot of similarities. It is in the mountains, however. So one girl lives in this rural area, and then one girl lives in town. And they end up connecting through like a pen pal program. And they do like this exchange. So the girl from the mountains comes to the town to stay with that family, and then vice versa. And so they really get to learn about the experiences that the other person has. So if you're interested in girls' friendship, if you're interested in issues of the environment, particularly in rural areas, like the coal mining comes up a lot in this book. Part of the book is written in letters. So if that's interesting to you, this might be a book you want to read. Choice number 3 is called The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. It's wonderful. I don't know if you got to read this in school or not, but it's by Christopher Paul Curtis. You can see it's won some awards. A bunch of these have won several children's literature awards. And it's a story of a family who lives in Flint, Michigan. And in 1963, they go south to visit relatives in Alabama. Yeah, in Birmingham. And so it's about these brothers and their trip to the South in the 60s. And so, they had a certain kind of life and were subject to certain kinds of rules in the North, and then how different that was when they crossed the Mason-Dixon line and came to the South, where Jim Crow was, shaped their lives and shaped their experiences so much. So where they could eat, where they could stop, who they could be friends with. And so it also sort of shares that experience, but it also starts to share how they start to intersect with some of the actual historic events that happened during this part of the civil rights movement. Kids love this book. They just really, really, really love this book. Christopher Paul Curtis is a staple in children's literature, particularly in children's literature about African American characters. So this might be a book you want to check out. This book is called El Defo. It's really funny. One of the most important things to know about it is that it is a graphic novel. Okay, so if you are interested in a book that has a different format, right, that's not going to be sort of traditional, but is going to follow much more visual format, then this might be a book for you. The book is actually written by C.C. Bell, and it's about an experience from her childhood. So she describes herself either as deaf or hard of hearing. I'm not sure. I should see. But she has hearing loss. And wore what was called a phonic ear, a big hearing aid when she was a kid. I think now they have fancy smaller ones, but at the time you had to wear this big pack and it hooked up to your ears. And then the teacher wore a microphone so that she could hear the sound sent directly to her hearing aids. And she was in a mainstream class, and so none of the other kids had that experience. And it's actually about how she convinced herself and some of her classmates that she was sort of like the superhero because she had this super powerful hearing aid. And sometimes the teacher would actually like forget and leave the mic on and like go to like the teacher's lounge and stuff and still be talking, and she could still hear her teacher. And so it's all about her experience as a deaf student, and one of the only deaf students who's mainstreamed, but then also this sort of superhero, so she calls herself El Defo. So if you're interested in graphic novels, or if you're interested in experiences of disability in children's literature, this might be a good book for you. The next choice is called Locomotion by Jacqueline Woodson. If you read The Other Side in our first literature circle, this is the same author. She is one of my absolute all-time favorites. It's wonderful. So Locomotion is about a little boy who's 11. His name is Lonnie Collins Motion, so that's why they call him Locomotion. This is a book that's actually written in poems. I don't know if you can see that with the light. Right. So again, it is a novel, but it's what's called a novel in verse. So the whole story is made up of poems that Lonnie is telling. Okay. And so Lonnie actually, you find out pretty early in the book that Lonnie's lost his parents. His parents die. And because his parents die, he goes into foster care. And his sister goes into foster care too, but they don't go to the same foster family. And so this is a book about how he, as this boy, is trying to sort of find the resiliency to keep going, to stay connected to his sister, and to learn a whole nother way to be in this whole new family that he doesn't really know. Right? How he grieves the loss of the family that he had, and how he sort of tries to find a way to keep going and to sort of tap into all that his family had given him already so that he can sort of decide what's next for him. It's an absolutely lovely, poetic, musical, wonderful book. Next choice is Totally Joe. It's by James Howell. I love reading this book with kids. So this one also has a different format. It's set up as an alpha biography. So each chapter follows a different letter of the alphabet, and it's written to his middle school teacher. So he's in 7th grade, and one of his assignments is to write this alpha biography. And so he does, right? So then this is the book. Joe is a really, really great protagonist. He is really sassy. He is really insightful. He's also openly gay. So he's an openly gay 7th grader. And the book is really a lot about his life, what it's like to be a gay kid, what it's like to sort of have to deal with the bullying, what it's like to be excited about maybe someday having a boyfriend and maybe you could hold hands, but kissing still gross. Just a very sort of age-appropriate look at LGBT youth and some of the experiences that you don't get to hear a lot in children's literature. But kids totally root for Joe. The format is fun. Joe's awesome. It's a great book. Next choice is Hoot by Carl Hyacin, I think is how you say his name. He's written a lot of books for kids and for adults. Hoot is a great book about this kid who sort of figures out that this new development in his town is going to hurt some owls, some baby owls that actually are burrow in the ground. And he gets really concerned. And so this is a story about finding out what the deal is and then actually fighting back against these developers. So if you liked Holes, or if you like stories about sort of like plucky kids that kind of get involved and try to sort of make the world better, if you're interested in environmental issues, this might be a book for you. It's fun, right? And it sort of shows kids being powerful and creative. How you doing? We're almost done. This book is called One Crazy Summer by Rita Williams Garcia. It's the first in a trilogy of books, right? So there are 2 that followed, which you're welcome to read after this if you want to. And it's about 3 sisters in 1968. So again, this is a slightly historical book. And so these 3 sisters live in New York City, but with their dad and their grandma. But their mom lives in California. And so and they don't talk to her much and they don't see her much. But this one summer, it's all worked out. They're going to get sent off to California to live with their mom for the summer. And so this is a story of what happens when they hit Oakland, California in 1968. And if you are putting together some pieces about history, you'll know that the civil rights movement was definitely strong in Oakland, and the Black Power movement in particular, and the Black Panthers in particular, were really sort of taking root and doing a lot of community organizing and community activism. And so this is actually the story of these sisters getting involved in some of that community work. It's a really, really interesting story. Very kind of different relationships with parents in this book, which I think is really interesting. The mother is a very interesting artist character, and she's an activist and she's an artist and she's got all this stuff going on. And so the kids kind of are on their own. And so this is about the world that they create for themselves over that summer and how their lives are changed. This is Sharon Draper's Out of My Mind. This is a book about an 11-year-old girl named Melody. And Melody's, I think, in 5th grade, and she has cerebral palsy. And so because of that, her brain is perfectly functioning just like anyone who doesn't have cerebral palsy, but physically she can't communicate. So she has no way to share what she thinks and what she feels and what she knows with anyone outside her. And so that's how her life's been for 11 years. And now she has new technology. Right, she gets a new communication board and she's able to use this new technology to communicate with people for the first time. And it turns out she's brilliant. And so this is a story about what it's like for her to suddenly have a voice physically, and then what it's like for her to try to then take up a role in her community, in her classroom, make friends, deal with all this other stuff that 11-year-olds have to deal with, but with this added burden of having a particular disability and people not always treating her like a person, right? That's really the burden. And it's a really wonderful, really interesting story. Again, interested in disability, interested in how kids overcome challenges. This might be a good book for you. 3 more. This is Seed Folks. If you're worried about books being long, this is one of the short ones, okay? Seed Folks is by Paul Fleischman, and it is a novel that's told in lots of different perspectives, okay? So each chapter is about a different person and from that person's point of view. And what brings all of these people together is this community garden in Cleveland, okay? So it's set in a city in Cleveland, Ohio, and there's this little space of land. And all these different neighbors in this neighborhood around this land come together and sort of start to create something there. But they're crossing all kinds of differences: age, race, gender, nationality, language, all this stuff. And so it's a little rocky, right? No one sort of knows exactly what they're building together. But it's a really lovely book about how people come together, about how community is made, about the kinds of things that connect us, and about how people see the same world in very different ways. This is Gossamer by Lois Lowry. She wrote The Giver and Number the Stars and all kinds of other wonderful books. If you like fantasy, this might be a book for you, right? So this is actually a story about these little sort of fairy kinds of creatures. And they gather up memories and give kids dreams. Right? That's sort of their job, these little fairy creatures' job. They go around and they touch things and then they deliver memories so that you have dreams. But there's also these bad things that gather up memories and give kids nightmares, and they're called the synesthetes. And so these two groups are kind of in battle, right? And so this is the story of one little boy in particular and about how these fairies are trying to like help him with his dreams and how the bad synesthetes are sort of cursing him with nightmares and how that sort of world all works out. So if you like magical stuff, if you like fantasy, this might be a book for you. And last but not least, sorry, I put one more Jacqueline Woodson in here because I had to. This is a book unlike any other book I've ever read. It's called After Tupac and Dee Foster. It's set in the 90s, which to me does not seem like a long time ago, but to you might seem like a while ago. And it's set in Brooklyn or the Bronx? No, Queens. I should know this. Queens. And it's about these two friends. So the narrator actually in this book doesn't have a name. Sort of unusual, right? So the narrator has this best friend named Nika, and they are just like buds. They just do everything together all summer. They spend all summer together in their neighborhood, hanging out, doing all this stuff. And then this other girl shows up in their school, and her name's Dee Foster. And so they start to hang out as this like trio, right? And they become sort of best friends as this threesome. And through their friendship, you learn about all these other things that are going on in their neighborhood and in the world. They love Tupac. And so this happens to be set the summer that Tupac is shot. Well, first he's arrested and they shot. So, but sort of the end of the life of Tupac Shakur. And so it's about his music and about the social issues that they're coming to realize about in the world, about their families, about their friendships, and just a sort of coming of age story to figure out how the world works, which in upper elementary, as you start to middle school, you're really kind of thinking about that, right? So this 11-year-old, 12-year-old kind of transition. And this is just a really interesting book. So if you like Tupac, if you like the 90s, if you like stories where kids are starting to realize, oh, there's a big world out there. Several of these have that, I think, in common, but this might be a good one for you. All right, it's a lot of choices. They're all on the Google Doc, but just to remind you, Esperanza Rising, Faith, Hope, and Ivy June, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, El Defo, Locomotion, Totally Joe, Hoot, One Crazy Summer, Out of My Mind, Gossamer, and After Tupac and Dee Foster. I hope something in there fits for you, and you'll see on the Google Docs spaces where you can sign up. We are not doing roles, but everyone will have a sheet of notes to fill out and submit as your preparation for your discussion, okay? You'll have a choice in how to have your discussion, but it has to be synchronous with your group. So you might want to start getting your book and making those plans as soon as everybody signs up. All right, I look forward to your discussions. I look forward to your reflections. I look forward to grading everything else that I have to grade. And I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving.